My cock ring is sliding off.
So Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings released, and it's the newest movie in the MCU, and the second in Phase 4. Now it's no secret that I was looking forward to it. I liked the teaser trailer, and I really liked the official trailer. What I was looking to get out of this was well choreographed fights, creative action scenes, and some magic. And I gotta say, I wasn't disappointed. It does all that pretty well, and overall, I enjoyed myself. Although there are a few things that hold it back, but I'll get more into that later. First, let me briefly explain what the movie is about. So Sean, whose real name is Shang-Chi, is basically a nobody who wants to relax and chill all day and doesn't know what to do with his life. And then one day, assassins are sent by his father to come take the pendant that was given to him by his mother. Turns out Shang-Chi has a past and isn't who he says he is. And from there, he reconnects with his sister and they go on a journey to stop their father. And along the way, we get some cool fights, action, and magic. That's the basic setup, and don't worry, I'm not going to go into spoilers in the video. Like I already said earlier, I enjoyed this movie overall and thought it was very solid, and there's some really good things in here. So let's get into that stuff now.
Extendo Mac from my first class, pulled the AR out the black bag, turned the whole room into a bloodbath.
For starters, you get some really good fight scenes, which is really what I wanted to see. I felt for years now that the MCU fight scenes have gotten really stale, so this is a very nice and welcome change. The martial arts are a lot of fun and well choreographed. The action in general is just fun and creative. It feels fresh and is a nice change up. Along with the hand-to-hand being good, you also got some magic involved, mainly when the 10 rings are being used, and I loved seeing those things in action. Although during the third act and the big battle, the hand-to-hand combat kind of takes a back seat, and it shifted to have more magical elements involved. But I also enjoyed that stuff too, so hey, I digged it. Along with the fights being well choreographed, they're also well shot. During the hand-to-hand combat, it doesn't jump cut or use shaky cam. Instead, it keeps things very steady so you can see what's going on. Also, the camera will sometimes move around the action and follow the actors, making it easy to see. Some very solid camera work. So overall, the action was entertaining, creative, and fun. It's honestly some of the most interesting action and fight scenes I've seen in an MCU movie in a while. Also, visually, there's some really great looking scenes. Besides the fights being well shot, there are several uses of magic and it just looks really cool. In the third act, the magic and fantasy elements of the movie are turned up to 11, and it was a shift from the hand-to-hand combat that we were used to seeing up to that point, but personally it didn't bother me because even that stuff was cool as hell to see. I think the cast was pretty good. Shang-Chi was a solid lead, Awkwafina wasn't as annoying as I thought she was gonna be, although still a bit annoying, and Shang-Chi's sister was good. Overall, everyone did a fine job and was serviceable, although the real standout was Shang-Chi's father, the leader of the 10 Rings, the Mandarin, the real Mandarin. You actually learn about him and the 10 Rings first in the beginning of the movie, and then you gradually start to learn more about him as more of Shang-Chi's backstory is revealed. And even though he's clearly not a good guy, there are several times where you kind of feel for him. He's the antagonist and the villain, but he's given a good motive, and he can be threatening and intimidating when he needs to be, but also he can be vulnerable and you kind of feel bad for him. His whole motive revolves around grief, and we learn quite a bit about him throughout the movie, so he's a pretty well developed character. I honestly would rank him as one of the best MCU villains. And the dynamic and history between him and his children, mainly Shang-Chi, was pretty interesting to learn about and see on screen. Now the story itself was fairly straightforward and pretty simple, but it remained interesting enough to keep me intrigued, due in large part to the creative action scenes and visuals, and learn about Shang-Chi and his family history. So the story, albeit simple if you break it all down, kept me invested in wanting to see what would happen next. Also, pretty solid music and soundtrack. It's a shakeup from what we expect to hear from a typical Marvel movie, so I appreciate it. The record label 88 Ryzen, who primarily signed Asian and Asian American artists, worked with the movie's director to help create the sound of the world. It's not as good as Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack, but that's a very high bar to reach. But the music is pretty good and stands out from other MCU movies. So that's the stuff that I really liked, and I feel like this movie could have been better if it wasn't bogged down by these next few things.
The whole school was painted red, I even murdered the special ed.
The forced humor. Yeah, you knew I was going to mention this. Just like Black Widow, there are several moments throughout that really try to insert humor where it doesn't belong, or the joke itself just kind of falls flat. Although I will give it credit, during the climax there aren't many jokes that break the tension, so when the big battle is happening, it stays focused on the big battle and doesn't try to insert unnecessary quips. But there are several jokes that made me roll my eyes, and one that actually nearly ruined a very serious moment early on. So the humor is here, but it's not as bad as Black Widow's forced humor, and it does get rid of it during the final battle, so there's the silver lining, I guess. Now there are exposition dumps throughout the movie, which is fine as long as it's given to us in an interesting way, and most of them are, but there are quite a few where characters will just say several lines of exposition, and it doesn't really feel natural. They're mainly in the beginning, and it's between Katie and Sean, and it happens a little later on when they're hanging out with their friends. They'll just start dropping lines of dialogue about their backstory. And there's a few moments like this too later on, and it all feels pretty clunky. It kind of feels like it should have been workshopped a little better to make it sound more natural, or maybe they should have presented that information in a different way. I guess another silver line would be that it's not the whole movie that's like this, it's only just certain parts of it, mainly in the first half. And finally, there were some pacing issues, mainly in the middle. The movie really pulled me in the beginning about the 10 Rings and Shang-Chi's father, and then from there we have several fight scenes and action set pieces. But then when they get to the compound, the movie starts to feel slow, all the way up until they get to the village in the forest. I don't know how to describe it, this section feels longer than it is. I guess it's because I got so used to the fast-paced action up to this point, that once it's all gone and things slow down, it makes it feel slower than it probably is. And even when they're in the village, things are still pretty slow there, although the history of the village and the magic surrounding it kept me intrigued, despite not much happening. But the climax makes up for it by picking things up again. So overall, I enjoy Shang-Chi. I found it fun and entertaining. The action and fight choreography are its best aspects, and the main antagonist is one of the best we've seen in the MCU. The backstory of Shang-Chi and his family is interesting, and I really like the magic and fantasy elements, especially towards the end. Just a slow middle part of the movie, forced jokes, and clunky dialogue hold it back from being really great. But I would say this is a good movie, and a solid piece of entertainment, especially if you're mainly looking for some really entertaining fight and action scenes. Now, I've been seeing people say that this is probably one of the best MCU movies ever. I'm not so sure about that, but it's definitely one of the top tier ones. And it's one of the few that I would actually recommend to someone to watch. Although if you are curious, yes, this is much better than Black Widow. While that movie felt very bland and generic, Shang-Chi feels very fresh, and I honestly wouldn't mind watching it again. And of course, as always, I asked you guys what did you think of it, and it was mostly positive, with many saying they were pleasantly surprised. And the biggest complaint I saw is just the forced humor, but I think the good really outweighs the bad here. It's a pretty fun, entertaining, solid movie. So now I want you to go ahead and leave a comment, let me know what you think about Shang-Chi. And if you enjoyed the video, go and drop a like on it. Thanks for watching, I'll catch you next time.
これ以上俺には探せません。ファスナーがお尻の下まで伸びてます。多分その先にスライダーが。